Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear the first of a number of witnesses who are or were employed by Kingspan. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Could we have Mr. Ivor Meredith, please?
Thank you.
Please ask you to read out the witness affirmation text.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Meredith. Sit down, make yourself comfortable. All right, yes, there's some water there for you. Good. Right, yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Meredith. Can you give the inquiry your full name, please?
Ivor John Meredith.
Thank you. And I want to start by thanking you for attending this public inquiry today to give evidence. It is very much appreciated. If you have any difficulty understanding any of the questions I'm going to ask you, please ask me to repeat the question or put the point in a different way. If you feel that you need a break at any time, please just let us know. We will take scheduled breaks, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, but if you need any further breaks, please just let us know. And the other thing I'd ask you to do is just try and keep your voice up, because there's a lady just sitting to your right there who's transcribing a clear note of everything that's said. So if you can speak clearly into the microphones, that would be great. Now, you've provided us with a witness statement. Can we go to that? It's KIN 3022312. It's dated the 12th of May 2020. If we go to page 75, there we can see that date. And is that your signature?
Yes.
And have you read that witness statement recently?
Yes.
And can you confirm that the contents are true?
Yes.
And have you discussed your statement or your evidence with anybody before coming here today?
Only with my legal team.
Okay, thank you. Now, just to start, I'm going to ask you some questions about your background and experience. Now, when were you first employed by Kingspan? Can you remember?
I think it was January 1999.
Yeah.
I studied building at university. I was working on the production line when I saw an advert for a technical advisor position at Kingspan. I was successful with that application.
Yeah, great. So you were working on the production line at Kingspan, is that right, when you saw an advertisement for... Yeah, its technical department.
Yes.
So how old were you around that time?
22, I think.
Yeah. And you said you had a qualification in building, is that right?
Yep.
What qualification was that?
It's a diploma. It's a higher national diploma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Now, you tell us in your witness statement, if we can look at paragraph 1A on page 1, that you worked at Kingspan for a long time. You worked there from February 1999 up until August 2015. That's almost 16 years, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
And during that time, you tell us in that paragraph that you held the following roles. We can see that in the bold text there. You say technical advisor, February 99 to October 2005.
Yep.
And then technical project leader, November 2005 to January 2015, yes? And then just towards the bottom of that page, technical project manager between February 2015 and August 2015. That's right, isn't it?
Yep.
Now, Philip Heath, who was the technical manager at Kingspan between 2001 and 2010, he says in his witness statement that he promoted you from a technical advisor to being the technical projects manager in 2005 within the technical team, rather than in 2015. So you say you made it to technical project manager in 2015, and he says in his witness statement that was 2005. Can we just check, are you sure that it was technical project manager in 2015?
My job role, although essentially remained the same,
Yeah.
I think my title did change somewhere between 2005 and 2015, sorry.
Yeah. That's okay.
But essentially I was doing the same job role. That was just when I got my business cards printed, I think.
I see, yeah. And when you were promoted in 2005, who did you report to?
Philip Heath,
Yeah, and he was the technical manager, yes?
yes.
And how regularly would you report to Mr. Heath?
I'd say at least 3 or 4 times a week.
Yeah. And was that mainly by email or was that also in face-to-face meetings?
We shared an office for a considerable duration. I think it was about maybe 3 years.
Right, yeah. Can you remember roughly when you were sharing that office with Mr. Heath?
Not directly, no.
Okay. And what about Mr. Malcolm Rochford? He was the UK Technical Director. How often would you report to him?
I think I only really started talking to him in my latter 2/3 of my employment at Kingspan, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, would that be, when you say talking to him, would it be with face-to-face meetings or would it be mainly with email exchanges with Mr. Rochford?
There would be a monthly technical meeting where all the issues of the business were discussed from a technical perspective.
Yeah.
And if my line manager, Philip Heath, wasn't available, I would sometimes go and speak to Malcolm if the inquiry was urgent.
Yeah. Yeah. And those monthly technical meetings, would you routinely go along to those with Mr. Heath and Mr. Rochford?
Yes.
Yeah.
Towards the latter part of my time at Kingspan, yes.
Yeah. And when you say towards the latter part, what kind of period of time do you think you're talking about when you would all be there at monthly technical meetings together?
I'd say maybe after 2008
Yeah.
to the end.
Yeah. Now, you've told us in your witness statement that, and this is the same bit there that we were looking at, that from 2005, you supported, it's under the technical project leader. You've got technical project leader November 05 to Jan 15. And you say that you supported Kingspan business development and UK certification requirements. And this includes sourcing all the fire testing for Kingspan. Is that right?
This was all the fire testing for Kingspan Insulation Limited UK, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've also stated
Oh,
that...
sorry. Can
Yeah.
I correct you there?
Yeah.
It was. I did the majority of the large-scale testing. There was a number of small-scale tests, the Class O tests, which I were not directly involved in.
Yeah, that's helpful. But you were managing all of the large-scale fire tests. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And then you've also stated that when you were technical project manager, and I appreciate it may not be completely clear exactly when that role started, you say managing the project team and the high-rise technical help desk. We see that there, yes?
Yeah.
And can you just help us? What was the high-rise technical help desk?
In 2012, we started experiencing a lot of inquiries with regards to the performance of K15 as high rise. So rather than let the frontline technical team deal with it, I created an email address which was distributed to myself and my colleagues, where we were able to get a handle on the questions being asked and deliver the correct answers.
Yeah. And when did you first become involved in the fire testing of the K15 product? Can you help us on that?
I think it was the first test, which was in 2005, if I recall correctly.
Did you receive any training before you started to carry out that role?
It was on-the-job training. This was a new test method at the time. So I'd witnessed a test of the previous variant, Fire Note 9. So it was a case of just applying that to K15.
And when you say you witnessed a test of the previous variant, Fire Note 9, so we know Fire Note 9 was the precursor to BR135, wasn't it?
Yes.
And when you say you witnessed that test to Fire Note 9, what was that a test of? Can you remember?
That was an external wall system. So it was a rendered insulation. I believe it was with a company called Permarock.
Right, yeah.
It was the K5 product, not K15.
Right, I see, yeah. And when you started to become involved in these large-scale testing for Kingspan, what knowledge did you have of the building regulations and the practical guidance in Approved Document B on fire safety?
I had an understanding of the limitations with regards to combustible insulations,
Yeah,
and the requirement for an alternative route to compliance.
yeah. So you knew, did you, that Approved Document B, the primary route was to say all insulation materials on tall buildings needed to be of limited combustibility. You knew
Yes.
that, did you?
Yes.
And you knew that there was an alternative route to compliance through full-scale fire testing.
Yes.
Yes. Now, if we look on page 2 of your witness statement now, at paragraph 3A, so we can see there that you're asked about your knowledge of K15 in the questions, including at A, when K15 was first developed. And you say this, you say, I believe around 2004, I was not involved in the PPDS, Product Process Production Development System, at that time. So is that right, that you believe that K15 was first developed around 2004? Is that your recollection?
In 2003, 2004, I was on the technical help desk. So I was on the front line dealing with the architects and inquirers. We'd always be asked to provide an alternative product, sometimes through the distributors. Celotex were putting a PIR product forward for use within glazing systems. And when asked for an alternative, and then when we looked at the regulations, we started to consider a phenolic foam as an appropriate solution. So we started putting that forward, but then we came across the 18-metre rule, and that was when we started to source a bespoke product for that situation, but it needed to have testing, basically, to justify its use.
I understand. Thank you. That's very helpful. Now, the first marketing material that we can find in what's been disclosed to us appears to have been issued in 2001. If we could just have a look at that. This is KIN 30020720. So if you can see in that top right-hand corner, there's a small date there. It says first issue March 2001. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And it's headed Cool Firm K15 rain screen board. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Do you remember being aware of this first issue of the marketing material in 2001?
That date doesn't seem right in my recollection.
Yeah. Okay.
I should have seen it if it was
Yeah.
there, yeah.
If we look on this page at the second bullet point, it says there specifically designed for use within rain screen cladding systems. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And I don't think we need to go back to it now, but you tell us in your witness statement, this is at paragraph 3E, page 2, when asked about the purpose or intended use of K15, that it was you call it a cladding system insulant in your statement. Would you agree that it was specifically designed, though, for use within rain screen cladding systems?
Yes. That version of that product, yes.
Yeah. And you also say, in your statement, this is paragraph 4, page 2, that cladding is a high-rise application. Perhaps let's just look at that. At page 2, paragraph 4 of your statement. If we can look down the page. you're asked the question there, at what stage in the development of the product did Kingspan consider that it was suitable for use as insulation in external cladding systems on high-rise buildings? And you say this, cladding is a high-rise application. The insulation is fit for purpose if used with the correct components. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
When you say those words, cladding is a high-rise application, can you help us a little bit more what you meant by that?
What I meant was rain screen cladding is predominantly used on high-rise buildings as opposed to alternative methods like brick facing and that sort of thing.
Right. Okay. That was your understanding, was it?
Yeah.
And can you help us as to whether any fire testing had been completed on the K15 product before 2001? I know you weren't quite sure about that 2001 date, but were you aware of any fire testing having been done on the K15 product before that time?
No large-scale fire testing.
No. Can we go then to an email chain I want to look at now? This is KIN 405048. And this is from November 2003. We can see at the top there, it's a chain that involves Malcolm Rochford, Philip Heath, and you're CC'd on that top email. And I just want to start with the bottom email in the chain, at the bottom of that first page, sent by Mr. Heath at 1647. So it's Philip Heath to Gwyn Davis, Malcolm Rochford, and then you and Steve Huxham are copied in there. Do you see that?
Yeah.
On the 11th of November 2003. And he says, could we undertake a small trial with K15 with the Lemtech 25 micron facing to both surfaces ASAP? This is to assist in the large-scale facade test we are planning for early next year. And then he says the plan is to undertake 2 tests, and then the cost of the test is around £14,000. Do you see that? He says there. Now, where he's referred there to the Lemtech 25 micron facing, do you think he means the Lamtech, spelt with an A?
He does mean the Lamtech.
Yeah. And is that the foil facer of the K15 product?
I'm not sure at this point in time.
Okay,
sorry.
yeah, fine. But K15 did have foil facings, didn't it, on either side of
Yes.
it? Yeah. And when we see, because we'll see it in a number of places, reference to something like 25 microns or 50 microns, referring to the foil facer, what's that telling us? Is that thickness or is it weight? What is that?
I think it's the weight per... It's an American description. I think it's the weight per square foot or something like that.
Yeah.
Of the foil layer in the core of the laminate facing.
I see, yeah. And then if we go up the page, the email immediately above is sent by Gwyn Davis. And he says there, same day, no problem. Please confirm thickness and panel dimensions. Would 100 metre square be enough? And then he says this will be also pentane blown. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, just help us on what that means, pentane blown.
This is it's a blowing agent used to create the foam.
Yeah. And that's that blowing agent, is it a liquid blowing agent used?
I'm not sure. It's
and it's used when the foam's manufactured, is that right?
Yes. This was about the time that Kingspan were buying an alternative technology.
Yes, I'm going to come to that with you in a moment. We'll come to look at that. But at this point, it does look like what they're proposing at this stage will be pentane blown, doesn't it?
Yes.
And was your understanding that the K15 product that was being sold in 2003 was pentane blown?
I can't recollect.
Okay, yeah. Let's go now into 2004. We're going to look at an activity report that you produced in January 2004. If we can go to KIN 405054, and we want to start on the first page. So if we look at the top of that page, can we see it says it's an activity report by you on the 26th of January 2004. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then if we go down to the third paragraph, if we can zoom in on that third paragraph headed Phenolic Development K15. And there we can see it says, looking at the potential for a Class B phenolic product that will achieve acceptability for above 18 metres in facade construction by building regulations. The product has been made pentane blown with a heavier grade foil facing, 25 micron. I will be testing within the SBI on 29th of January 04, and if successful results are obtained, we will be moving towards a large-scale testing scenario, BS 8414, performed in conjunction with steel frame system market leaders Metsec. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So we can see that this appears to be talking about the development of K15, doesn't it? And it's
Yes.
testing.
Yes.
Now, there it says the product has been made in the second sentence there, second line down. The product has been made pentane blown with a heavier grade foil facing 25 micron. So is that the K15 as you understood it to be when this report was written in 2004, January 2004?
Okay. I was lobbying within the business for an improved fire performance product for this application. So I was seeking to have the 25 micron facer, which would offer more fire resilience or resistance. I was using the single burning item test as to benchmark the performance, because I wanted an improved product for use in this application.
Yeah.
Above the standard.
Yeah. So that's an improved product for use above 18 metres, yes?
Yes.
And can you help us now as to how different that product was to the K15 that had been being sold up to that point?
As far as I'm aware, I was just looking at the an improved facer at that time.
Yeah. So it was that heavier grade foil facing, the
Yeah.
25 micron.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah. I just want to show you now a major changes spreadsheet that's been put together by Kingspan for this inquiry. If we go to KIN 3022307, and we'll need the native version and the tab at the bottom of the Excel spreadsheet titled Major Changes. If we go to line 4 of this spreadsheet, if we go down to line 4, sorry, there we can see February 2004 on the left-hand side. Have you got that?
Yes.
And it says there the change, 25 micron foil used in facer. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So this is a spreadsheet that's been put together by the inquiry because we wanted to know what the different changes had been to the K15 product over time.
Yep.
And that's what we see there. So as you've explained, that product was given the heavier grade foil facing because what you thought that might have a better chance of passing in the large-scale fire testing. Is that right?
It would offer more stability to the product under fire.
Yeah.
So yes.
And can you help us? Was that foil facer perforated or unperforated?
I believe that we had to, Kingspan had to change to a perforated facer for manufacturing reasons. It was unable to produce it with an unperforated 25 micron foil.
Yes, and wasn't that change when the new technology K15 came in, which we're going to come to in a little while, when you bought the Dutch company,
Yes.
the Kesterend technology? Yes?
Yes.
So does that mean, am I right then, that before that, the 25 micron foil that would have been used in 2004 and 2005 was unperforated?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Now, if we just go back to the email chain we were looking at, the activity report we were looking at, KIN 405054. And just, I want to ask you a little bit more. You've already mentioned it. You've said you were doing some testing under the single burning item tests. You say that there in the third sentence. Was that testing under the European testing and classification system?
Yes.
Yes.
That's the EN 13501 Euroclass
Yes.
testing.
Yes, and we've had Dr. Lane explain to us what that testing is. And you said earlier that that was to benchmark. So was that you testing it out on a smaller scale to get some sense of how it was performing in fire?
The BRE indicated that if the product was Euroclass B, then it would stand a good chance of being successful when tested to be S8414.
Right.
So that's what I wanted for the product.
Yeah. And who was it at the BRE that gave you that advice? Can you remember?
It was either Phil Clark or Sarah Colwell.
Right.
Probably Sarah Colwell.
Yeah. And can you help us, when you did you do those single burning item tests?
Yes, I think we tried.
You tried. And did it get a B in those tests?
I think we only achieved Euroclass C.
Right. Yeah. And we can see from this paragraph that the plan is, if you get some successful results with that smaller scale testing, we'll be moving towards a large scale testing scenario to BS 8414. Can you help us? When was that first large scale cladding test to BS 8414 carried out on K15?
I think I recollect around 2005.
Yeah. If we look at your witness statement on this, if we go to page 54, paragraph 115A, it's in the bottom half of that page. And at A, with reference to a May 2005 test, you're asked, was that the first test to BS 8414 carried out by Kingspan on a system incorporating K15? And you say, yes, if this is the 60mm K15 with the non-combustible board in front. Now, we can tell you that the test to BS 8414 carried out on the 31st of May was carried out on a 60mm K15 product. So does that mean that it's likely that that was the first test to 8414 on a system incorporating K15?
That would be the first test on a system.
Yes.
I have a recollection of testing without a facing, just to understand the performance without a cladding system in front of it.
Yes, yes. I think we've got some records of that, and I'm going to take you to that in a moment, like a naked test, I think someone calls it, with no board in front.
No cladding in front of it.
Just the insulation, yeah. Can we go now to an email from the 19th of March 2004? This is KIN 403685. So if we look at the top half of the email first, we can see there, this is an email that you've sent to someone called Phil Chilvers at the LABC Services, and also Andy Bowers at Tower Hamlets. And the heading is insulation above 18 metres. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you've copied in here Stephen Huxham. And is it right that he was the business development manager for K15? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And we can see from the first paragraph of your email there that the product under discussion is K15. It says, further to our recent discussions regarding the above-mentioned issue and the use of Kingspan Cooltherm K15 phenolic insulation in facades above 18 metres, we would ask you to comment on the following. And then there's further paragraphs underneath. And you say in the second paragraph, K15 is classed under the building regulations as being class 0 rated. And then you give the BS 476 Part 6 and Part 7 references. You say exhibits less than 5% smoke obscuration when measured under BS 5111 Part 1. You say it's also a thermoset material and therefore does not run, melt or drip when affected by heat. When subjected to a flame source, a phenolic foam will form a surface char in much the same way as wood. This surface char will protect the underlying foam from the fire. Phenolic foam will also resist a chemical breakdown at a significantly higher temperature than any other thermoset insulation. These are all very important quality when looking at fire resistance of buildings and means of escape in the event of fire. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then if we look at the third paragraph, I want to read that with you. You say, reading section 13.7 ADB. Now, pausing there, what we now know as 12.7 was back then 13.7 in a previous version of ADB. That's right, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So it says, reading section 13.7 ADB, in a building with a story of 18 metres or more above ground level, the document suggests insulation material used in ventilator cavities in external wall construction should, and you've put it in quotes, should be of limited combustibility. Unfortunately, the product does not meet the criteria for limited combustibility, BS 476 Part 11, as described in ADB. Therefore, it is pigeonholed with the combustible insulations, even though the char that forms when in contact with a flame source limits the combustibility of the product. Having spoke to the BRE regards their guidance paper, BRE 135, the purpose of the publication is so that products that are classed as combustible can be incorporated above 18 metres in ventilated facades, as long as attention is given to the correct detailing, i.e. fire breaks, etc. The first publication of this document provided statements of fact for basic construction types, utilising a range of insulations from highly combustible EPS to less combustible mineral fibre materials, giving recommendations on their real use in ventilated facades. And then you go on. Within this document, guidance is given for the use of fire barriers at every 2 stories with combustible insulations. As the second edition is considered an extension of the document and not an amendment or replacement, we believe this advice to still be credible as long as all risk areas have been assessed and the correct preventative measures have been adopted. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So those are long paragraphs, but the first point I wanted to ask you about this is, can we take it from all of that you were well aware in March 2004 that K15 was not a product of limited combustibility?
Yes, that's correct.
And you were well aware that according to ADB, in order to be classified as a material of limited combustibility, a material would need to be tested to Part 11 of BS 476 and meet certain criteria, or be classified as A1 or A2 under the European classification system. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
And K15 was never tested to Part 11 of BS 476, was it?
I think I remember doing one at a later stage, but it was never going to meet those performance requirements. I think we just did it just to box off that question.
I see, yeah. So it didn't get anywhere close to meeting the requirements it needed to meet to be of limited combustibility, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And is it also fair to say, based on this, that you did have a good understanding at the time of the relevant regulatory regime and the relevant guidance? You'd obviously looked at it in detail by this point.
Yeah, well, we'd taken guidance on this document to try and understand what were the routes to compliance.
Yeah. Who had you taken that guidance from?
I think we'd spoke to everyone and anyone we could that had a knowledge of this document. So we talked to the BRE. I think we spoke to Anthony Bird at the time. We would speak to insurers, architects, anyone, fire engineers. But it was, this was kind of a new area at the time, I think, utilising these products in this situation.
Yeah, yeah. Now, looking at this email and the wording that you use in the third paragraph, looking at it now, do you think your description of the combustibility of the product is fair and accurate there? You say in the fourth line down, it's pigeonholed with the combustible insulations, even though the char that forms limits the combustibility of the product. Do you see that there?
Yeah, some of this terminology is pulled out of a standard answers document that was in circulation within Kingspan. I think it was maybe some FAQs from the EPFA website.
I see. Did you agree with those standard answers? Did you think that they were correct in terms of what you knew about its fire performance?
I believed them, yeah.
You believed them, yeah.
Yeah.
When you say it was pigeonholed with the combustible insulations, what do you mean by that? Because it was a combustible insulation, wasn't it?
What Kingspan were trying to say was that phenolic was a better combustible insulation than the other combustible insulations.
I see.
And I think that was a fair comment.
Okay, yeah. And then if we look on at the short fourth paragraph after that long third one, you say there, this product has been regularly accepted above 18 metres with many ventilated facade systems as long as proprietary fire barriers have been adopted. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, was that right as far as you understood it, that in March 2004, the product had been regularly accepted above 18 metres with many ventilated facade systems?
As far as I understand, yes.
Yeah. And where would you have got that information from? How would you know that it had been regularly accepted above 18 metres?
Because it was being used and we weren't... it was being... Yeah, because it was being... The specifications were being accepted.
I see. So what you're saying is specifications being written for buildings at this time with K15 in them for above 18 metres, and those were simply being accepted.
Yes.
Did you know on what basis they were being accepted?
Probably off the back of the guidance in BR 135, which states that you have to use fire barriers.
So do you think people at that time understood BR 135 to mean, provided you've got fire barriers in there, you can use phenolic foam even though it's combustible?
That's how we interpreted BR 135 at the time.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. And was that your understanding at the time, that that's how you could justify K15 being used above 18 metres, that it was looking back to the language of BR 135? Was that your understanding?
It quickly evolved as soon as BS 8414 and Fire Note 9 were readily available test methods.
I see.
So then once they were set in stone as available, that was our route to compliance.
I see. And if we go to the fifth email, the fifth paragraph of this email, you say there, Kingspan Insulation Limited have tested a phenolic board behind a mortar render system at the BRE facility in March 2002. The product satisfied the criteria of the test, BS 8414 Part 1, 2002, by having no fire growth in the facade above the 5 metre mark, above the 3 megawatt combustion chamber. As a direct result of these discussions, I have opened dialogue with the FRS department at the BRE, and we are currently devising a test configuration using cool-therm phenolic in a ventilated facade. As we are confident of this product's performance, we have proposed to test the phenolic insulation without the use of fire barriers. On successful completion of this test, we will have approval through BS 8414 Part 1 for using phenolic foam insulation, K15, above 18 metres without additional fire barriers. Do you see that there? Now, that first sentence there, just starting with that, you say Kingspan have tested a phenolic board behind a mortar render system at the BRE in March 2002. Is that right? Was there a large-scale BS 8414 test?
This was, I think, the Permarock test, the render system.
And was that with K15?
No, that was with Cooltherm K5.
So that was with a different phenolic board, is that right, that test?
Essentially the same phenolic core,
Yeah.
but a different facer.
And how was the facer different?
It was, it would be a glass tissue facer on the K5, but this was a product with a render directly in front of it.
Yeah. I understand.
So it's not directly comparable to a ventilated facade.
No.
I'm just a bit taken back by my comments there about without fire barriers. The purpose of testing a render system is you would normally need fire barriers above at high rise, but with if you had a BS 8414 test, you could actually prove the use of the system without fire barriers.
Right.
So I think I might have been just getting a little bit confused there with the unventilated test, with the render test.
Right. I see. Yeah. Are you aware that BS 8414 Part 1 was not published until the 13th of December 2002? So where you say there in the first line that there was this test at the BRE facility in March 2002 and the product satisfied the criteria of BS 84141 2002, in fact, we know that BS 84141 wasn't published until December 2002. Can you help us?
Yeah, I recall we were testing to a draft version of the BS.
I see. Yeah,
So it's all essential purposes, it was the final test method.
I see. Yeah. And were you personally involved in that test in 2002?
I witnessed it, and I looked over the test report. So,
Yeah.
I was there.
So were you in the burn hall when the test took place?
I was in the burn hall, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And you said it was with a glass tissue facer. Was that a facer that was likely to perform, as far as you understood it, better than, say, the 25 micron foil facer?
No, if anything, the foil would have better performance.
I see. And who else at Kingspan was involved in that test?
I can't recall, I'm afraid.
Okay, yeah, it's a long time ago. Do you remember how the tested system performed?
This is the rendered system.
Yeah.
It was successful.
Right. Was there ever any formal test report produced?
Yeah, but this would be owned by Permarock.
I see. Now, I want to move now to ask you about the Kesterend technology transfer that you've already referred to this morning. Now, we know that Kingspan acquired a Dutch company in around 2003 named Marek, a manufacturer of insulation that used a different technology in the manufacturing process when producing phenolic foam. That's right, isn't it?
I think it was called Tarik. TAR.
Right. The name of the company?
Yeah.
I see, yeah. And is it right that this technology was then used to produce K15 and was referred to internally at Kingspan as new technology or Kesterend technology? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And is it right that Kesterend was the name of the plant in the Netherlands where it originated?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, were you aware of what fire testing that new technology foam had been subjected to prior to acquisition of that company by Kingspan? Were you ever told that?
I think we were told that it was Class O to the UK test methods.
Okay. But nothing else?
Nothing else, no.
And were all of Kingspan's phenolic products transferred to that new technology as far as you understood it at the time?
I believe some of the duct range, the duct insulation may have remained the old technology.
Right.
But I'm not sure.
And the inquiry understands that a Kesterend technology transfer group was set up to manage the transition from the old technology K15 to the new technology K15. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Were you part of that group?
I'm not sure if I was directly.
Okay. Did you have some involvement with that group?
I may have, I don't recall.
Okay. And can you help us? How did new technology or Kesterend technology K15 differ from old technology K15?
This is where I'm limited on my chemical understanding of
Okay.
these products. So I was told that it was a better, more robust product, more easily manufactured.
Okay. Is it right that the new technology K15 introduced perforations to the foil facer?
That's correct.
And I think you tell us in your witness statement that you believe that the perforated foil was essential for stable production.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yes, that's the case.
And what does that mean, essential for stable production?
I think it required a certain amount of drying. We had drying ovens installed, and I know they had various problems with those ovens, and they had to put new ovens in. So the product was improving slightly after the changeover.
Yeah. And you say there as well that you believe all Cooltherm products, all Cooltherm process moved to perforated foil. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And you also say that Kingspan kept meticulous records of production batches to ensure traceability. Was that your understanding?
Each production run would have an individual number, and there would be a continuous factory production control on that run.
Yeah.
And it would be tied back to a standard operating procedure.
Yeah.
So, yes.
And just to be absolutely clear, old technology K15 had unperforated foil faces, and new technology K15 had perforated foil faces. That's right, isn't it?
As far as I understand, yes.
Now, if we can go back to that schedule of changes we looked at before, this is KIN 22307. And then I want to look at row 7 this time. just back one. Yeah. So here we have date on the left-hand side, September 06. And we can see the change. It says there, Kesteren technology, SOPs with perforated facing. I appreciate you haven't written this, but SOPs, what would that probably stand for?
Standard operating procedure.
Yeah, thank you. And in the detailed description, it tells us, following its purchase of a Dutch manufacturer of phenolic foam, Kingspan adopted its methodology for producing phenolic foam. This was referred to in Pembridge as new technology or Kesteren technology. Pembridge is the place in Herefordshire, isn't it, where Kingspan's
Yes, that's correct.
based? And it says, this was referred to in Pembridge as new technology or Kesteren technology and had been being run successfully in Holland for many years before Kingspan acquired the business. And then that, I want to look at that column N then on the right-hand side. It says there, the PPDS shows that Vincent Kopok, the R&D manager, is that research and development manager?
Yes, that's correct.
Was the project manager. His role was to work with the Dutch manufacturer to understand the Kesteren technology and bring that technology to Pembridge, including arranging any trials. And then it says this, Malcolm Rochford, technical director, updated the status of the PPDS, confirming that the fire testing was required for this project. Philip Heath, technical services manager, signed off the part of the PPDS to confirm that physical fire tests and certification were completed. Do you see that there? Mm-hmm. And the PPDS, does that stand for Product and Process Development System?
That's correct.
And so that's a system for monitoring the development of that new product, is that right?
That's an internal system that was devised, I think, as a requirement of ISO 9000.
I see,
You
yeah,
have
a quality
continuous-
control
yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a quality control process to ensure that you understand the attributes of the new product, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And do you agree with what's said there in terms of who had responsibility for different aspects of this, including that Philip Heath undertook the fire testing and certification for the new technology K15?
Yeah, this is the problem I had with this system, that although it's signed off, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's done. It means that it's in hand, I think. Because the certification and the fire testing for these products, we were doing it for years after the changeover. So, yeah.
So I think what you're saying is after the change had been made and certainly all products, including K15, was being produced with this technology, you were still trying to bottom out its fire performance. Do you agree?
We received the test reports from Kesteren, but to obtain the certification, and because this came from a different marketplace with different market requirements, we needed to apply the UK test methods and the UK testing regimes to actually get the product signed off. I think we introduced our portfolio to the BBA, and they were in agreement that they would accept the product based on the test evidence that we had. So the certification was ongoing,
Yeah.
basically.
I'm going to take you back as a special topic to look at the BBA certification a little bit later. But in terms of what's said there, Philip Heath signed off the part of the PPDS to confirm that physical fire tests and certification were completed. Can you help us as to what fire tests were involved in that signing off process?
I think at this time we were CE marking the products, so we were probably going through the European EN 13501 fire tests.
Yeah. And can you remember specifically with relation to K15 whether it achieved any particular European EN 13501 classification before the sign-off by Philip Heath?
I can't recollect.
Okay. So can you help us as to what certification had actually been completed for the new technology K15 before it was launched?
We had British Board of Agreement certificates for most of the phenolic range, the standard, the floorboard, the K3, the wallboard, the K8. I think we may have had certification for K12 then. So we would have contacted the BBA, and they came in 4 times a year anyway, so they would have monitored that process change.
Including on K15?
K15 was not subject to certification at that point.
Right, so when K15 was being sold after this change, it was not subject to certification at that point, is that right?
No, it took us quite a few years to obtain British Board of Agreement certification for K15.
Yeah. Can you help us as to what test reports were received from Kesterton before you?
I remember
product?
seeing BS476 Part 6 tests and BS476 Part 7, the surface spread of flame.
Yeah, so those relevant to National Class Naught.
Yeah.
But any other more larger scale fire testing, did you get any such results from?
I don't think there was any large-scale testing at that time.
Or European classification results, single burning item
I think
testing?
there was some SBI testing.
And can you remember what that said?
I think there was a variety of classifications between B and C. However, the Kingspan facings were, the UK facings were predominantly different to those used in Kesterton. So it was a case of repeating these tests.
Yeah, that's because their facings were perforated and your facings prior to that had been unperforated. That's right, isn't it?
The facings previously were unperforated in Pembridge, and the facings after were perforated.
Yeah.
As to the facings in Kesterton, I wasn't really aware of what they were.
I see.
But I know that they weren't necessarily appropriate for the UK market.
Yeah. I now want to ask you about the large-scale fire testing of K15. If we look at your witness statement at page 50, you were asked at paragraph 111 who held overall responsibility. Sorry, let's just bring that up. Yeah, so you were asked who within Kingspan held overall responsibility for planning and arranging testing to BS 8414 on systems incorporating K15. And you say, this would be myself as leader of the project team, and I would report to Tony Millichap or Philip Heath as the technical managers, who in turn would report to the technical services team led by the technical manager. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And who was it that Mr. Heath and Mr. Millichap reported to? Was that Mr. Rochford?
Yeah, that would be Mr. Rochford, the technical director.
Yeah. And if we look at page 51 of your statement, paragraph 114B, you tell us there that you project managed all BS 8414 testing between 2002 and 2014. That's right, isn't it?
I believe that to be correct, yes.
And you state in C, just below that, we ask whether you were present, and you say, I was present at all the tests. Is that right?
I believe that to be correct, yes.
And who appointed you to that role as project manager for all of that large-scale testing?
That would have been my technical manager and the technical director at the time. So Malcolm Rochford and Philip Heath or Tony Millichap.
Yeah. Philip Heath has said in his witness statement that you were given a large degree of autonomy. Would you agree with that?
We were a very busy business. I was tasked with doing the testing, and I was asked to find out what and how we were supposed to test. So, but I was coming up against a brick wall really in the marketplace, because there were certain elements that didn't want to be involved in testing, and the BRE was still learning about the test method, so they weren't being able to give us really good guidance on the approaches to take.
I see. When you say you were coming up against a brick wall because there were certain elements that didn't want to be involved in testing, what do you mean by that? Which elements weren't wanting to be involved in testing?
We started an association called Rainscreen Works, where we sought to bring the cladding manufacturers, the fire barrier manufacturers, the framing people into the fold so they could help us fund this testing. Because at £10,000 a time, it was ludicrously expensive for us to get something that would cover a large proportion of the market. So we approached the major cladding manufacturers to try and involve them in a BS 8414 test, and they refused at the time because they were happy that they were being included in high-rise without this test evidence.
When you say happy they were being included in high-rise, do you mean happy that phenolic foam was being included in high-rise?
No, they were...
happy that their product...
They were happy that their products were currently being used in high-rise in front of, say, a non-combustible cladding, a non-combustible insulation. Therefore, they felt that they didn't need to do any further testing.
Yeah. And which cladding manufacturers were you thinking of here?
I think it was Trespa, Eternit, all the leading cladding manufacturers we approached.
Yeah. Now, back to Philip Heath, he also says that you were given a large degree of autonomy, but he also says that he maintained a general supervisory role over you. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And were decisions about what components and materials to use in large-scale fire tests, were they collective decisions of the technical team?
They were collective decisions between myself and my line managers.
Yeah.
And I tried to seek advice from the technical team where it was appropriate.
Yeah. I just want to show you just some passages in some other witness statements and get your view on it. If we look at Tony Millichap's statement, where he's dealing with your role in large-scale fire testing, if we go to KIN 30-20821 at page 56, and it's at 11.13, and he says there, as I say above, the Fire Focus Group decided the testing strategy and delegated the execution of the strategy to Ivor Meredith, who would specify some of the finer details, such as fire barriers, to address the variables in line with his experience, and then go away and select the agreed materials. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Is that an accurate description of how it worked in practice?
I think somewhere around 2010, we introduced a fire focus group.
Yeah.
So I could get more official feedback from the other parts of the business.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's true. But I also utilised my line managers as well.
Yeah. Who was part of that fire focus group?
I think it was myself, Philip Heath, Justin Davis, Gwyn Davis, Vincent Coppock,
Yeah.
Malcolm Rochford, Lindsay Hobbs.
So it was a big group of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of the design of the test rigs, if we go in the next paragraph down at 11.14, the top of the next page, he says this, if we can zoom it, bring it up. Yeah. He says, Ivor Meredith was responsible for the design of the test rig, including the preparation of drawings and plans. I would have overseen this process, providing technical input and feedback if necessary, particularly with regards to whether the test rig design was realistic. Do you see that there?
Mm-hmm.
So is that right, that you would design the test rig and prepare the drawings and the plans for it?
And I would use an external designer or contractor, but a cladding system would have a set number of elements in it, and we would take advice from an appropriate architect or designer that we were incorporating the elements correctly.
Yeah. Did Tony Millichap provide any technical input on how to design the test rig?
I think Tony's input was like everyone's input. It was just with regards to what materials we were essentially using.
Right, yeah. He would have responsibility for that, yes.
Yes.
And before his time, would that have then been Philip Heath?
It would have been Philip Heath, yes.
Yeah. Can you remember ever getting any feedback from Tony Millichap or Philip Heath about whether or not the test rigs you were designing were realistic and representative of cladding systems actually available on the market?
We would have discussions with regards to what we were going to receive from the BRE after this, what the test result was going to mean. What we wanted was for the test result to have a large scope of application, for it to mean that our product could be used in conjunction with a number of different systems. Because of the cost and the time it took to arrange a test, we needed to get as much out of it as possible. And this was our current understanding, with the BRE guiding us to test with a non-combustible cladding system.
Yeah.
That we would be approved for all non-combustible cladding systems.
Yeah.
However, after the test, they removed that proviso.
Yeah. We're going to come on to this in just a minute. I think what you're saying is your understanding was prior to the test you did in 2005, is that right?
Yeah.
That the BRE had said if you can test one non-combustible outer exterior, we'll give you some kind of report that says you can use it for any non-combustible outer exterior. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And your evidence is that they then, I think you say in your witness statement, pulled the rug from under your feet
Yes,
and changed
that's correct.
their minds, yes?
Yeah.
Great, we're going to come back to that. Just back to how you set up the test rig and selected the materials. If we then look at paragraph 111.16 at the bottom of this page in Mr. Millichap's statement, he says, Ivor Meredith was responsible for checking that the built system conformed with the drawings and plans. However, the BRE or other test house always thoroughly examined the build-up and would only sign off on it jointly with Ivor Meredith when it was satisfied that it conformed with the drawings and plans. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And would you agree with that that's what the BRE did, that they would always thoroughly examine the build-up and only sign off on it when they were satisfied that it conformed with the drawings and plans?
Yeah, the BRE would go through the build-up with a fine tooth comb and make sure that it was the same as the plans that we were presenting.
Right. And was that the case for all tests to BS 8414 carried out on systems incorporating K15?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. And who was it at the BRE that would be going through it with a fine tooth comb and checking it?
I think Phil Clark had the sort of control of the laboratory, but there were guys underneath him that were running around with clipboards checking this kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. And then if we look at the next paragraph in Mr. Millichap's statement, he says at 11:17, Ivor Meredith was primarily responsible for checking draft test or classification reports. Although there was a lot of interest in draft test reports internally when we were sent them, generally Ivor Meredith would be the only one to look at them in detail, and others would not really see the reports until the final copy was produced and circulated. Ivor Meredith would then explain the contents of a test report to me and the rest of the technical team. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, do you agree with his description of how it worked in practice within Kingspan in terms of who would be looking at the test reports and whether he would only look at them in detail once the final copy was produced and circulated? Is that an accurate description?
I would often circulate a draft sometimes in paper instead of email to prevent it being used. But really, we would only check it to ensure that the correct terminology was used for the Kingspan products.
Right.
So it was then adequate for release into the marketplace.
When he says at the end of that paragraph, Ivor Meredith would then explain the contents of a test report to me, would your managers be reading the test reports themselves?
They would often need guidance as to where the product was meeting the pass-fail criteria.
I see.
So I would show them the graphical data at the back of the report.
Yeah. And then what, you would give them guidance on whether that satisfied the criteria in BR 135?
At the time, yes.
Yeah. Does that mean that without your guidance, they wouldn't have been able to read and understand all of the test reports themselves?
I don't think that's completely the case. This was a very expensive test.
Yeah.
This was a lot of money being spent in this area, so I think they read it cover to cover.
Yeah. And then if we look at paragraph 1121 now, this is a similar point to the one we looked at before, but I just want to ask you about this. In the middle of that page, Mr. Millichap says, from Kingspan, Ivor Meredith was responsible for ensuring that the test rig matched the specification. However, the BRE were fastidious in examining the test rigs and their agreement to the drawings and specification provided. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And again, do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. Now, can we just look at Philip Heath's witness statement? This is at KIN 30207009 at page 29. And I want to look at paragraph 4.43 on page 29. He says that to this, any written advice provided as to the use of K15 over 18 metres beyond the provision of product literature and once received the BBA and LABC certification would have received input from either Ivor Meredith, Andrew Pack, or myself, with Ivor Meredith providing the primary input into any bespoke advice as he was considered within Kingspan to be an expert in this regard. I would therefore only provide my input where he requested it or where he was unavailable. Do you see that there?
Sorry, whose statement is this?
Yes, sorry, this is Philip Heath's statement.
Sorry, could you rephrase the question?
So, and I wanted to ask you in particular about where he says in the fourth and fifth line that you were considered within Kingspan to be an expert in this regard. So he starts the paragraph talking about any written advice provided about the use of K15 over 18 metres would have received, including you, and you would have provided the primary input into any advice about that, as you were considered within Kingspan to be an expert in that area. Is that how you understood it at the time? Did you understand people to think you were an expert in this at the time?
Because I was the one that performed the test.
Yeah.
Then I was the one with the expertise to understand the test.
Yeah. So to that extent, you agree with what he said there?
Yeah. Yes.
You sound a little bit doubtful. Is there something you want to qualify?
I was very much involved in producing test reports, but I don't know if I was too busy to actually get involved in the literature side of it. I know I steered clear of the latter versions of the literature. It was circulated to a wide group, and I was just involved in testing predominantly. So, we had the test evidence, and that was what we provided to the marketing department.
I see. So are you saying that in terms of, when you talk about literature, are you talking about the marketing literature for K15?
Yeah, any written advice, really.
Yeah, any written advice. So your evidence is what you would steer clear from that and just keep your focus on the testing, is that right?
We'll still steer clear of the literature side of it. I was involved in written advice to customers,
Yes,
so I did some of that. But we agreed our approach.
I see. So you steer clear of the literature side, but you agree that you were involved in some written advice to customers. Yeah. And I'm going to take you later to some of the written advice you gave on a couple of big projects. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, just one more question before
That's all right. You
perhaps take a break.
Take your own course.
Adrian Pargeter now, Mr. Pargeter, who's the head of technical and marketing for Kingspan. If we could just look at his third statement. This is top of page 23, paragraph 3.25. Sorry, KIN 3022610. And it's page 23. So he's asked who was more senior to Mr. Meredith in this specific area of work within Kingspan, and he's talking about K15 and testing of K15, and he says this: no one at Insulation UK was more knowledgeable than Ivor in this specific area of work, although Ivor always reported to someone in a position more senior to him within the business. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Again, would you agree with that there was no one within Kingspan that was more knowledgeable than you, but that you always reported to someone in a position more senior to you within the business?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I think that's probably a good moment
Yes.
for a break.
Good. All right. Well, Mr. Meredith, we're going to have a short break now. We'll come back at 25 to 12, please. And I have to ask you on this occasion and others when you leave the room, please don't talk to anyone else about your evidence or anything that touches on your evidence. You can talk to people about anything else, but not about your evidence. All right?
Okay.
Thank you. Would you like to go to the usher, please? Good. 25 to 12, please. I know you do, and I'm touched by your politeness, but I'm afraid from the earliest stages, I decided that people should not feel they need to stand when now we, walk into the room. So thank you, but don't trouble yourselves on another occasion. Right, would you ask Mr. Meredith to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Meredith, all ready to carry on?
Yes.
Good, thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you. So I want to talk now about the 2005 BS 8414 test. We know that on the 31st of May 2005, Kingspan tested a system at the BRE using K15 as recorded in report 220876. And that test report is then dated the 8th of December 2005. And we also know, but we're not going to get into it now, that the BR 135 certification report, classification report in relation to that test was not issued until 10 years later on the 28th of September 2015. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct.
Now, whose decision was it to undertake that May 2005 8414 test?
It was a market requirement for the use of an installation above 18 metres, so
Yeah.
it was a needs must.
Right, yeah. And who within Kingspan authorised that test to be undertaken? Who would have been the ultimate decision maker?
It would have been between Philip Heath and Malcolm Rochford,
Yeah.
but due to the expense, it would have gone to the managing director.
Yeah. And the managing director at that time, who was that?
Peter Wilson, I
Yeah.
believe.
And what was the purpose of carrying out that test? What did Kingspan hope to achieve by it?
To show that K15 could be accepted for use above 18 metres.
And did you have discussions with the BRE about how that test might be used prior to it being carried out?
The BRE were learning as we were learning. Every test we performed, they would send many people to watch it because they were still agreeing their EXAP rules, their scope of application. So there were no firm rules to say if you tested in this configuration, it would be acceptable for use in these scenarios.
Yeah.
So although the BRE had suggested that if we test with the non-combustible cladding, we will be acceptable for use with all non-combustible cladding systems.
Who was it who suggested that within the BRE?
I believe it was Sarah Colwell.
And when you say you believe, were you present when that conversation took place, or did someone tell you?
I would have had that conversation with her on the telephone or face to face.
Yeah. You've said in your witness statement, just for the transcript, this is at paragraph 115E on page 55, that the decision to carry out this test was a collective decision with all senior members of the technical team to test the particular system that was tested in 2005. That's right, isn't it?
I collated the materials together and would have presented them to my line manager. This was the one in 2005 was our first step of potentially many tests. So it was agreed that this was a good starting point.
Yeah. And your line manager, was that Philip Heath?
That would have been Philip Heath at the time,
Yeah.
yes.
I want to show you an email that you wrote to David Hoare and Sarah Colwell of the BRE on the 30th of May. This is 2005. This is the day before the test took place. This is at KIN 404791. And if we could blow that up a little bit more, yes. So it's from you to those two individuals at the BRE. And what you do there is essentially is list people who are going to be attending the test tomorrow. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And you've got yourself at 1, you've got Philip Heath at 3, Steve Huxham at 4, and others within Kingspan. You've got at 6, it's Andrew Shutt from Eurofox. I think he helped you build the rig, didn't he?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And then in the second to last paragraph of this email, beginning please, I just want to read this out. You say, please could you only discuss the results with myself or my boss, Philip Heath. I don't know whether there will be a few moments after the test to do this, after attendees 4 to 7 have left, or whether we could fit this in on Wednesday. I would like a copy of the video, preferably to turn up in MPEG format, and then you ask about the video and what they can offer. So just focusing on that first part of that paragraph where you said, please could you only discuss the results with myself or my boss, Philip Heath. Why was that? Why did you want to have that discussion only when the other attendees had left?
Because I didn't want our sales team running away with news about a successful test until myself and Phil had understood how we could disseminate that information to the marketplace.
Right, I see. So you wanted it to be a decision that you and Philip Heath took first about.
Well, we needed to understand the results and what we could then do with it, so we could relay it back up the chain to the Kingspan management.
And in fact, did that discussion take place after the test? Was there a discussion with just you and Philip Heath and the BRE about the test afterwards?
There would have been a point where, I don't know if Phil was involved in it, where I would have got the so-called green light from the BRE staff. They're not officially allowed to say, but they can give you a printout of the unverified thermocouple data.
Yeah.
And you can see quite clearly that the 600 degrees temperature threshold was not hit at the second level thermocouples.
Yeah.
Therefore, that was seemingly a test success.
Yeah.
Obviously, that isn't ratified until you get the full test report, but
Yeah.
it's very rare that they would screw up their thermocouple results that badly that you didn't get the pass that you thought you got.
I see, yeah. I think what you're saying is that if you can see it hasn't reached the 600 degrees, given that the test standard allows you to hit that but for no more than 30 seconds, if it's not hit that at all, then you've got some idea that it's met that particular part of the BR135 criteria. Would you agree?
Yes, that's correct.
And there are other parts of the BR135 criteria, aren't there?
Recollect, it's breaching the top of the rig, and I think falling debris is part of the LPCB certification side of that test method. So
mechanical performance.
Yeah.
In terms of the materials used in the test, can we go to Philip Heath's witness statement first? On page 72, this is KIN 30200709. And look at page 72.
Sorry, can I just add?
Yeah.
I saw the name David Hoare there.
Yes.
He was actually probably my principal contact in written form or discussions prior to Phil Clark taking over the burn hall. So although I would discuss with Sarah as much as I could, it would be David would be my day-to-day contact.
That's
so
really
it
helpful.
might have been him that I had that discussion with about the non-combustible boards.
I see. So the discussion that you thought might have been with Sarah Colwell about being able to extrapolate from this test might have been with Philip Hoare,
Yeah. David Hoare. Yeah.
Sorry, David Hoare. So then looking at Mr. Heath's witness statement, page 72, KIN 30200709, at 11.11, at the bottom of that page, you might have looked at this before, you say, Ivor Meredith would have selected the exact materials. However, the decision to use a representative non-combustible cladding panel in the 2005 test would have been the result of more general discussions which are likely to have taken place primarily between me, Ivor and the commercial team, but also as part of a wider discussions with the technical team. I agreed with the approach taken and the use of the selected panels as being representative of non-combustible cladding panels. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And do you agree with what he said there about the decision to use a representative non-combustible cladding panel would have been the result of more general discussions with him, you and the commercial team, and also wider discussions within the technical team? Do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that.
Now, we know it's right, isn't it, that you built the test rig yourself with some help from Eurofox, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Who designed the rig for this test? Can you help us?
I worked with Eurofox. We took guidance from the BRE on the position of the fire barriers based on what they had seen previously with other cladding systems.
What advice did they give you about that? What kind of advice?
I think it was in respect of the positions of the fire barriers.
I.e., how to position the fire barriers in order to pass the test?
The proximity of the fire barriers to represent floor-to-floor fire barrier requirements.
I see. So where the fire barriers should go to be representative of how it would work in practice on a cladding system. I see. Let's go to the test report now. This is at BRE 402511. This is the test report. As I mentioned earlier, the test was done on the 31st of May 2005, but the test report itself is dated December 2005. We can see that there in the bottom right-hand side. And if we look on at page 6 within this report, under the heading trade name, we've got description of product at the top of this page. If we can blow that first half up. We've got under trade name and specimen identification code or number, we've got Cooltherm K15, 0 ODP phenolic rain screen insulation board. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Can you help us? What does that mean? We know what Cooltherm K15 is there, but zero
ozone depletion potential. This was it was just the latest marketing terminology for the product.
I see.
I think it was it was because all our products we were claiming 0 ODP when they were 0 ozone depletion potential.
Right, yeah. And was this old technology K15, since new technology was yet to be produced in the UK?
I think it must have been.
Yeah, that's our understanding, but we wanted to check with you. And what about the foil faces? Were they perforated or unperforated?
If it was old technology, it would have been unperforated.
Yeah. And was it your understanding that the K15 used in this test was the same product that was being offered for sale by Kingspan in the market at this time, so in May 2005?
I believe it was, yes.
Now, staying on the page 6, if we now look under immediately below, two below that, we get fixing details in bold. And we've got details of the Cooltherm again in the first line. And then if you look at the end of the second line, we can see it gives a description of the cladding that was used on this for this test. And you've got 1,200 millimetres times 900 millimetres times 6 millimetres thick cement particle boards manufactured by UAC were mechanically fixed at 600 millimetre centres to an aluminium railing system, which was also mechanically fixed to the block work substrate. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And as far as you were aware, were those cement particle boards non-combustible?
It was a non-combustible cement particle board manufactured by UAC Barhard or Berhard. They were a Middle Eastern manufacturer. But yes, it was non-combustible as far as I was aware.
And is that description of the outer cladding given there correct? That it had those dimensions, 6mm thick, cement particle boards manufactured by UAC. Is that description accurate?
Yes, that's definitely accurate.
And can you remember who ordered the boards that were to be used as that outer cladding?
There's probably a record in my email. I know I think I got them from speaking to Andrew at Eurofox. He put me onto a cement particle board supplier, I believe.
Yeah.
And I got a shipment sent across for the purposes of this test.
Yeah. And they were based in the Middle East, this manufacturer?
Yes.
So not a UK company?
Not a UK company, no.
Do you know whether any record was kept of the boards that were used, other than what we see on this test report?
I was under the impression the BRE take a sample of all the different elements of the build-up.
Right.
This is something that if you go for certification as opposed to just testing,
Yeah.
this was something we were moving towards and hoping to achieve eventually. So later tests, I would ask the BRE to keep a sample of the insulation board and a sample of all the other materials so it could be tied back to the test result.
Yeah. What discussions had taken place within Kingspan as to what should be used as the external outer surface on this test rig? How had you come to fix upon these particular cement particle boards manufactured by that manufacturer?
We tried to involve lots of different cladding manufacturers, hoping that they would put something towards the test and help us build the rig. There was a bit of a reluctance at that time, so we just took a non-combustible board that was available, and we just fitted it to the outside of the cladding to represent a non-combustible cladding system. That was the idea. That was what we were working towards.
Yeah. And when you say a non-combustible board that was available to who, in what market?
That you could buy in the UK market.
Right.
Obviously, this wasn't supposed to be a cladding system. This was just supposed to be representative of a non-combustible outer layer. The point of BS 8414 is the fire will, regardless of the materials, will inevitably break into the space above the window, and it's the speed it spreads up the insulation, how the fire barriers stop it from spreading, the buckling of the framing system for the cladding, and to some degree the type of cladding used, which will decide whether this system meets the requirements.
Yes, and that's quite an important point I think you just made there. You said this wasn't supposed to be a cladding system. This was just supposed to be representative of a non-combustible outer layer.
Yeah.
So would you accept that this, as constructed, it wasn't representative of a real-life, real-world cladding system at that time?
No, we were looking just to put a non-combustible layer on the outside, so it could be extrapolated by the BRE to apply to many non-combustible outer layers, or any non-combustible outer layer.
I see. You began that answer with no. Did you in fact mean yes? The question I put to you was would you accept that this, as constructed, wasn't representative of a real-life, real-world cladding system at the time? And you said no. Do you mean no?
It's not directly representative.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And who in Kingspan had been involved in those discussions about what outer layer to choose?
It would have been myself and Philip Heath. We were solely perhaps naively looking for just a non-combustible board,
Yeah,
just to go on the outside.
yeah,
This was our first real step into this testing. So
yeah. And when you say we were solely, perhaps naively, looking for a non-combustible board, what do you mean when you use the words perhaps naively?
Well, later, after seeing a lot of tests, I would understand that the size of the cladding panel would potentially have a bearing. That there is a multitude of factors.
Yes,
This is why the BRE couldn't tie down any EXAT rules at the time,
yes,
because it was just going off in too many different directions. Basically, the variations that could be you could get in one cladding system. So to get a catch-all test result was not possible.
yes, yes. Yes, so I think what you're saying is each time you tested, you realised how complex this area was in terms of system testing,
Definitely.
and that unless you've actually tested the system that you're using, you actually can't predict how it's going to perform in fire, can you?
Not at that point, no.
No.
I mean, the BRE did suggest that there would be. Myself and Phil had a meeting with the BRE when Kingspan MetalCon. We went down there with the director, and the discussions were, okay, we want to approve these 5 systems, and there were 5 systems. And the BRE were talking about somewhere in the region of 300 Ks worth of testing. But that wouldn't box off anything. That would just they would be able to then tell us how much more testing we'd have to do to actually get where we needed to be. So it was an impossible situation for us.
And that meeting you've just talked about with the BRE, can you remember roughly when that occurred?
I can't, unfortunately. I think it was. It might have been sometime after this test and before Kingspan MetalCon did their testing.
Right, yeah. And a couple of times you've referred to EXAT rules.
Extended application rule.
Exactly. I just want, for the benefit of those listening, what you mean is rules that might allow you to take one test and extrapolate into other scenarios. That's what you mean by that.
Yeah, there are known EXAT rules for, say, the roofing test.
Yes.
But there aren't any at this point. Well, there weren't any that I was aware at this point for BS 8414.
No, yeah. So with fire resistance, you sometimes got EXAT rules. Is that fair? But for this kind of large-scale fire testing, there were no such rules, were there?
And the rules would only be created after a number of tests were completed.
Yeah, precisely. Can we look at the second witness statement of Adrian Pargeter at this point? This is KIN 30200824 at page 100. And I want to look at paragraph 10.57 there. And he's talking there, we can see in the first line, about the 2005 BS 8414 test. He says there in the first line, it refers to a 6mm UAC cement particle board being used as the external cladding element of the system tested. This would be unusual and would not be representative of an external cladding element because such material is not designed for an external application and may be subject to degradation on weathering. And then he says this, however, having investigated the issue further, Kingspan is of the belief that the test report incorrectly references the type of cladding used and that the cladding actually used in the external cladding system tested in 2005 was a fibre cement board, non-combustible, as opposed to cement particle board, which is generally rated as Euroclass B, which would be more representative of an external cladding system used in practice at that time. And then he finishes, but I think it likely that the fibre cement board was chosen to simply replicate a non-combustible facade element as representative of the cladding used at the time. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And I want to ask you, as the person who constructed the rig and was present and was intimately involved with it, whether you agree with what he says there, where he's saying it wasn't a cement particle board, but it was a fibre cement board. Do you agree
I would
with that?
struggle, I don't know, I'm not au fait with those sort of materials to know what the difference between the two is.
Right. But as far as you were concerned, was the description given in the test report an accurate one?
I would have sent the UAC data sheet to the BRE, and they would have then taken that information and used that to create the description, which
Right.
appeared in the
Yeah.
in the test.
And do you think you did have a UAE data sheet at the time?
I believe I had something. It's a long time ago, so I
Yeah.
can't recollect, to be honest.
I see. Let's go to a photograph, KIN 405079. This is a close-up photograph that I think you took of the cladding boards. There we go. So these are photographs from the rig in the 2005 test. And are the exterior cladding boards we're referring to here, the ones at the bottom here in grey?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct.
Does that help in any way as to whether this was a cement particle board or a fibre cement board?
I can't see whether that had fibres in it or particles, unfortunately, sorry.
Right, yeah. And I'll come to ask about it in a moment, but can you just explain to us what else we're seeing above that in this photograph? What's the black bar?
Okay,
across?
that's the Promat RSB rain screen barrier,
Yeah,
which is a ventilated graphite-backed intumescent fire barrier that was on the marketplace at the time.
right.
That's essentially our fire barrier at floor level.
Yeah. So were there a number of those within this rig?
There was one right the way across the rig horizontally at about, I think it was 1 metre above the window aperture, and then again just below, half a metre below the second level thermocouples.
Yeah, I see. And otherwise, are we looking at the K15 and its foil facer
That's the K15, yes, with the,
underneath that?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just going back to what Adrian Pargett has said in his witness statement about it being a fibre cement board and not a cement particle board. Have you ever been asked since that time exactly what material was used in the test?
I think we would have just referred to the report, but it was,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it was a non-combustible board to represent a non-combustible cladding.
Yeah.
So, like I say, it's accepted that a flashover fire breaking out of a window will destroy the lintel and it will break in to the lower part of the facade system through the cladding.
Yeah.
So if we were to do that test with a cladding that was 20 mil or something that was totally impregnatable, you wouldn't actually be testing the insulation because you'd just be testing a non-combustible cladding system. So we put something there that would fail at that critical area, allowing the fire to get into the chimney effectively, and then we would see if the fire barriers worked in conjunction with the K15.
Yeah. Can we go now to a series of emails between you and Mr. Clark and Mr. Hoare in November 2005? This is at BRE 403278. This is a series of emails between you and Phil Clark and David Hoare in November 2005. And in the top email, so in the most recent of the chain, you're proposing the actual text to be used to describe certain components in the test report.
Yes.
Do you see that? So you've written, Phil, with regards to the ventilated cavity barrier, please use the descriptions below for the test report. So we can see you're giving text to put in the test report about what the materials were. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm taking the manufacturer's description and just stripping it down, removing any company terminology like Promat RSB and Intimex LPSK. I'm just breaking it down into what the material was.
Yeah. And then if we look in the fourth line down of the third paragraph, yes, it's in black. It begins for the confidential section of the BRE report. It's the second black paragraph as opposed to the blue text on that page. And you see it says for the confidential section of the BRE report, I would propose. Can you just help us? What is the confidential section of the BRE report?
My understanding was that the BRE would hold a log of the materials utilised in the test. And it was the Promat RSB that was used, so therefore it needed to go in the main folder that the BRE hold on this test. But with regards to the version that we wanted to put out in the marketplace, we wanted to remove potentially the reference to the Promat product because maybe they didn't contribute any monies towards this test method or this testing.
Or might it be that you wanted to remove reference to the specific products so that you could use it to say that it supported a wider range of cladding systems than the one specifically in this test? Could that also be the reason?
We were looking to make the report general, yes. That was our end goal, was to have something that could be used in as much as it could, basically.
Yeah. So the more generic the description of what was tested, the more helpful that would be, wouldn't it, for Kingspan in its marketing of K15?
Yeah, certainly. A fire barrier has an independent test requirement under the British standard. So we were hoping eventually, say that the Promaseal RSB had 1 hour's fire resistance, we would want other 1 hour fire resistant fire barriers to also be acceptable. I'm constantly thinking of the future marketing of the product here.
Yeah. Back to that line about the confidential section of the report. How had you become aware that there would be a confidential section of the report at all? How did you know that?
I think that's just my terminology. I was happy for them to keep that information on file. I just wanted a more generic fire barrier discussed within the main report.
Yeah. Can we go now to an email sent before the test? This is KIN 405075. It's an email you sent on the 26th of May 2005. So if we can blow up that email. It's from you, and it's to a number of generic technical services email addresses, and also copying in Malcolm Rochford. Can you see that in the top?
Yes.
And you say, please find enclosed pictures of the BS 8414 Part 1 test rig I have been constructing at the BRE Watford this and last week. Mm-hmm. You see that there. And just to be clear, BS 8414 Part 1 is a test on a masonry structure, isn't it? As opposed to a steel frame structure.
Yes, that's correct.
And then you say this, the construction utilises an aluminium bracket system, 60mm Cooltherm K15, a 40mm ventilated cladding zone, which is fitted with ventilated cavity barriers at floor level. The outer face is clad with a sacrificial cement board, which will be destroyed by the 3 megawatt fire that will be breaking out of the aperture at the bottom of the facade. The idea is that the fire will not spread up the cladding zone of the remaining insulated construction outside of the burn area. When this happens, we will have a verified K15 is the insulant of choice for use in high-rise situations as per Fire Note 9 references in Part B of the building regulations. And then you say, a sample of the intermittent ventilated fire break is situated on my desk, should you wish to have a closer look. Now, I'm going to come back in a moment to that description you give there of a sacrificial cement board. I'll pick that up separately. But I just want to ask you for the moment, you've said at the end of that email that a sample of the intermittent ventilated fire break, the cavity barrier, is on your desk, and you invite people to go and see it if they want to. Why did you do that?
So they could be familiar with the kind of materials they needed to talk up to gain acceptability for use of K15.
Yeah. And as we've already discussed, it was a ProMat PromaSeal RSB cavity barrier, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
And did you yourself select that particular cavity barrier for use in this test?
I think it was one of the only ones available in the marketplace at the time, so I took it and ran with it, basically.
And did you understand that that cavity barrier used in that test was representative of the type of cavity barrier which might be used on a rain screen cladding system?
That was what ProMat promoted that product as, yes.
I see. Were you aware that the ProMat cavity barrier had a very high graphite content?
It was a graphite, yeah, it was an intermittent graphite cavity,
Yeah.
fire barrier.
What I want to put to you is that this particular cavity barrier was not a commonly used or widely available product. What's your response to that?
I was not aware of that.
Yeah. On the test report itself, we see, let's just go to this for a moment, at BRE, back to the test report, BRE 402511, page 6 of the test report. At the bottom of that page, you see some words headed installation of specimen, about 3 headings up. Do you see that there in black? And it says installation of specimen. The test sponsor undertook the supply and installation of the test specimen. BRE staff undertook no supervision of this process. Do you see that wording?
Yes.
Now, is that right? Because I think you've told us that, in fact, the BRE do carefully check the installation of the system to check that what's installed is what was planned to be installed.
I think this is a comment towards like the certification approach of testing, where they would come into the factory, they would witness the production run, they would sign the production batches, we would then send them to the laboratory, they would then check with their records that the signed product is what's being installed onto the wall. That's what I believe they're talking about there. They were constantly checking, cross-referencing with drawings the mounting of the insulation onto the facade.
I see. Is what you mean that they're somehow trying to draw a distinction here between testing and certification by saying in that second sentence, BRE staff undertook no supervision of this process?
I believe that's what they're angling towards there, yes.
I see. But as far as you were concerned, did Kingspan carry out careful checks of what was installed for this test? Sorry, not Kingspan. The BRE carry out careful checks of what was installed in this particular test?
As far as I was aware, they were constantly monitoring what we were putting up on the wall.
Yeah. If we go to page 33 of your witness statement now, and I want to look at big paragraph M there on page 33. Sorry, actually it's little m. In the middle of that page. And here you're being asked about the BBA certificates, which we're going to come back to for K15. But I want to ask you about something you say at lines 2 to 4 there about 8414 testing. You say this, you say, therefore, the product when tested as part of a system, meets BR135, you cannot strictly say K15 on its own meets BR135. You have to talk system. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, you were aware at the time of the May 2005 test, is that right, that BS8414 is a system test? Do you agree?
We came to understand this, yes.
Did you understand that prior to this 2005 test?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. It's right, isn't it, that no one component of the system can be picked out as suitable for use over 18 metres following a test to BS8414, can it?
No, it's got to be tested as part of a system.
Yeah. On the contrary, following the test in 2005, in order to build an external wall system incorporating K15 which would be compliant, the exact system tested would have to be replicated, wouldn't it?
Without any EXAP rules, yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And just to be clear, there never were any EXAP rules, were there?
No.
I now want to ask you about a spreadsheet that's been produced for the inquiry by Kingspan. It was provided in response to questions from the inquiry as to exactly what K15 product was tested during each test at 8414. It's dated the 31st of January 2020. And if we go to it, it's at KIN 3022357. And what I'm going to do is ask you whether you can help us fill in some of the blanks or unknowns in this schedule. I take it you've not seen this schedule before?
I don't think so, no.
No. So we can see that what the columns along the top do is they tell us the test date, the sponsor, the system tested, the result, etc., any report number. And then in the sixth column, they tell us the properties of the insulation of the tested insulation product. Do you see that there? It's the wider column in the middle of that page. Properties of the tested insulation product. And then in the next column, they tell us was the tested insulation product the same as K15 being offered for sale by Kingspan Insulation at the time? And they say whether it was known or not known. And would you agree that that's quite an important question, whether what was tested was actually offered for sale by Kingspan at the time?
Yes.
And if we look at the first two tests that we've discussed already today, they're recorded on this spreadsheet, and we'll come back to this spreadsheet a number of times. We can see that the first test listed is the naked insulation only test from 2004. Do you see that? December 2004.
Yes.
And we can see it says insulation only in the third column.
Mm-hmm.
And there doesn't appear to have been a test report identified, it says, for this.
This was purely an indicative test method.
Yes, that was my question. That was because it was purely an indication of how K15 behaved, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And going over to the next column, the properties of the insulation tested in that test in December 04, the naked test, are unknown. Can you help us any more about what?
I believe it was a 60 millimetre.
Yeah.
Cooltherm K15.
So the same as what was tested then in May 2005?
It's my understanding, yes.
Yeah. And then if we look at the 2005 test, in the row below that, the 31st of May 2005 test. And we can see there that the insulation tested was 60 millimetre, properties of the insulation product tested. And I believe you just told us that that was old technology K15. That's right, isn't it?
I think it was, and from looking at the photos that you just showed me, I believe it was the unperforated version, yes, so old technology.
Yeah. And so in that column there, could we put in that it was a 25 micron unperforated foil that was tested at that time?
I think that would be the case, yes.
Yeah. And as old technology, that would have been manufactured using a pentane blowing agent, is that correct?
I can't quite remember the blowing agents used, actually.
And then staying with that 31st of May 2005 column, when asked was the tested insulation product the same as being offered for sale by Kingspan Insulation at the time, it says unknown. Can you help us as to what your understanding was? Was your understanding, I think you've already confirmed this to us, but just to be clear, that the K15 you used on that May 05 test was what was being sold to market?
It was, as far as I understood, yes.
And so you would have been content at that time, is this right, to tell customers in your marketing material that the K15 used in the 2005 test was the same as that which was being offered for sale in 2005?
Yes.
So I now want to ask you about BR135 classification for the 2005 test. Now, we know that it wasn't received until the 28th of September 2015, over 10 years after that test was undertaken. But in terms of your evidence, what I want to focus on is what happened in the months after the May 2005 test about this. If we can go to paragraph 31 of your witness statement towards the top of page 15. You're asked the question there at 31, between 2005 and 2014, were any customers or prospective customers made aware that no BR135 classification report existed for a cladding system incorporating K15? And your answer is, Kingspan had testing that met the requirements of BR135. A classification report was additional expense, which really said no more than the test, unless you could add EXAP rules and give it some scope of compliance. This is what we tried to do with off-site and the original Part 1 test without success. Now, can I just check, does it remain your view that a BR135 classification report was an additional expense which said no more than the test report?
This was additional monies to pay for a test, to pay for somebody to interpret the results, which I personally found easy to interpret. I did not know that a classification report was required. I understood that you just needed to cross-reference your results with the BR135 document. But it became apparent that at a later date that it was prudent to get a BR135 certificate to actually validate your test results. But at the time, we just didn't think it was needed.
When you said there, I didn't know that a classification report was required, when are you talking about then? When did you not understand that that was required, and when did that change?
I say required because the marketplace asked for it. That's why I say it was required. When we did the testing in 2005, perhaps to 2008, we didn't feel that it was a necessary thing to spend money on. When we would want to get a classification report when based on a number of tests, that was my end goal. So a classification report which would say Kingspan K15 is suitable for use behind non-combustible cladding with this size cladding panel, this size ventilated zone, etc., etc. that was our end goal, but we obviously Kingspan didn't achieve that.
Okay. Let's just look at some emails now on this topic. If we can look at KIN 405156. This is an email from you to Sarah Colwell of the BRE on the 24th of March 2006. So we know that you've had the December 2005 test report for the May 05 test, and this is now in March 2006. And you write in the first line, you say, Sarah, I hope all is well. Further to our meeting last month, have you progressed with the K15 assessment to BRE 135? We could do with this ASAP. Please let me know predicted time frame and costing. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And would you agree that at this time, Kingspan was very keen to obtain a BR 135 classification for the 2005 test?
What I'm asking for here is an assessment of K15, not just that particular test, but I'm looking for a BR 135 classification for a number of systems. I want them to give us as much as they can based on the evidence that we've got to date, and potentially suggest what further testing we need to do to actually gain a meaningful certificate. I am unsure as to whether you'll find any responses in my email from the BRE with regards to this. They seem to not be able to respond to us.
Well, we'll come on to what we found in the email chains. So are you saying that at the time you understood BR 135 as something that could be used to classify in a broad sense for a range of applications? Is that what you're saying?
That's what we were looking for.
Yeah.
As to whether that was possible with BR 135 is questionable.
Yeah. That email there is referring to a meeting last month. It says, further to our meeting last month, have you progressed? Can you help us as to whether that meeting was about BR 135 classification? And if so, what was discussed?
I would have been asking for scope of application on the K15 test results and what we could do with that test evidence, how we could apply it to the marketplace, what it actually meant in reality.
Yeah.
Because it was them that guided us down the route of testing with a non-combustible cladding board to represent non-combustible cladding systems. So, you know, I wanted them to do what they said they were going to do, basically.
Yeah. And again, you've talked about it was they that led us down this route of testing a non-combustible cladding board. Is that the conversations you were talking about earlier, either with Sarah Colwell or David Hoare?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And what was Sarah Colwell's response to this email? Do you know?
I don't know if she ever responded.
Right. What was your understanding at this time as to why the BR 135 classification was not forthcoming from the BRE?
This is not. We never requested a BR 135 classification for the 2005 test. We were requesting assessments of the 2005 test to apply against BR 135.
I see. So you're requesting extrapolations.
Yeah.
That's your understanding,
Yes.
is it? I see. Let's have another look at some other emails. Let's go to KIN 403688, which is some exchanges you had with Kingspan Offsite. Now, Kingspan Offsite are a subsidiary company of Kingspan, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And it's an email you write, we can look at the top of this page, to Alan Scupham of Kingspan Offsite, copying in Simon Waller of Kingspan Offsite as well. And you start this email by saying, you say, with regards to our recent telecon about the performance of our Cooltherm K15 in ventilated cladding systems, please find enclosed the 2 versions of BRE 135. And I think what you're enclosing there is the publications BR 135. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And then you say this in the second sentence. You say this: as the test BS 8414 has no official pass or fail criteria, these documents must be referred to in order to make sense of the test report that is included within the following mail. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So is it right then that you were clear at this point that BR 135 classification was required after the 8414 testing?
What I'm saying here is that the BR 135 must be referred to. I didn't believe you had to pay the BRE extra money for them to say that it's classified in accordance with this standard.
I see. So what you're saying is you thought anybody could take the 8414 test and work out for themselves whether the BR 135 criteria pass-fail were met. Is that right?
This sort of information, we were targeting it at fire engineers, the people that would read this test. We were expecting them to have the knowledge to be able to extrapolate that information that they were looking at.
I see. Yeah. Now, you go on in this email to set out in some detail the history of the relevant regulatory regime in this area. So in the second paragraph, you're talking about a BRE publishing a paper in 1960, and then you talk about 1983 BRE published guidance document. So you're setting out your understanding of the history of the relevant regulatory regime. You talk then about, on the 11th of June 1999, a fire at a 5th floor flat which spread up the outside of a 14-storey block in Irvine. So that's the Garnet Court fire, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you're explaining what happened thereafter.
I think I got this text out of Sarah Colwell's presentation that she sent to me.
I see. So this is information you've learned from the BRE?
Yes.
And if we look in the 6th paragraph down, if we keep going down this email, we can see the end of the 5th line. That's right. So it's in the large paragraph there, beginning approved document B stipulates. So let's just read this together. You say approved document B stipulates that in buildings with stories over 18 metres, which is additionally the height of a fireman's ladder, the cladding and the insulation must conform to stricter requirements than for low buildings. ADB requires that the material is either limited combustibility or assessed in accordance with BR 135. And then in the next sentence you say this: Cooltherm K15 has been successfully tested by the BRE to BS 8414 Part 1 and assessed in accordance with BRE 135. Now, what I wanted to put to you is that's actually not correct, is it? Because it hasn't actually been assessed
No, I think
in accordance with BR 135, has it?
I think that was just bad terminology. What I meant was it can be assessed in accordance with BR 135 because it met the requirements.
I see. In the next sentence, you say, where Cooltherm K15 is utilised above 18 metres to fall within the requirements of approved document B, horizontal ventilated cavity barriers must be introduced at every floor level above the 18-metre point. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Can you help us as to why in this email to Kingspan offsite you're not clarifying that K15 can only be used in one specific construction over 18 metres, i.e. the one that had actually been tested in May 2005?
Sorry, could you say that question again?
Why didn't you clarify in that part that Kingspan K15 can only be used in the specific construction that had been tested in May 2005.
This was effectively an extension of an ongoing discussion that we'd had with Kingspan offsite. They were preparing their own test data, or they were preparing to put their own tests forward of the systems. I think they were putting 4 systems in the marketplace. So they were looking to do that testing.
I see. Would you agree that that sentence, reading it now, gives the clear impression that there's no further requirement to using K15 over 18 metres other than properly spaced cavity barriers?
It could be interpreted like that, yes, I agree.
You agree? Yeah. You then move to a section of the email which you've headed "for internal ears only!" exclamation mark. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And you say the BS 8414 flyer is currently being reviewed, and we will be removing the references to the fact that a Class 0 material can be used below 18 metres on request of our ASMs. Also, the assessment that it mentions is not officially available, as I'm currently discussing the content with our friends at BRE FRS. I think that's BRE Fire Research Station, is that right?
That's correct.
By assessment there, if we go back and look at what you said at the bottom of that page before, you say also the assessment that it mentions there. Were you referring to the BR 135 assessment for the 2005 test?
Yeah, this was what I hoped to get off the BRE.
Yeah. And were you discussing that with the BRE at the time?
Yes. In the emails that we've just seen, I believe.
And did the BRE have reservations about providing a BR 135 classification report for the 2005 test, as you understood it?
I don't believe they had any. I never requested one. So what I was asking for was expanded scope of application. I didn't want a classification report solely on what we tested, on what Kingspan tested. I wanted a classification report that meant something realistic to the marketplace.
Right. But you didn't get either, did you?
No.
If we go back to the second page of this email and look at the second paragraph, you say this: the above-mentioned assessment will be a more favourable document that's easier to interpret and will not include the bad pictures that are featured within the test report. Although the construction achieved what can be diagnosed as a pass when cross-referencing the documents, it does look very destroyed. However, this test is mainly looking at fire spread. And then you say it's because of this that we haven't yet done a metal frame test to BS 8414 Part 2. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Would you accept, looking at this now, that you were well aware of the importance of the classification report at this time?
I was aware of the importance of a classification report that gave us scope of application. Like I said, that was my, in hindsight, my bad management that I never requested a classification report for the initial test. But I didn't believe it was required initially.
Let's look at an email now from April 2008. This is KIN 402584. This is an email you wrote, 2 years later, and it's to Tracy Derman at a company called rainscreencladding.co.uk and then Lee at rainscreencladding.co.uk. Are they part of something called LSC Limited? Is that right? Can you recall?
I can't recall directly, to be honest.
This email is about the fire barriers used in the 2005 test. That's the seems to be the main subject. Can we read the first paragraph together? You say, Sorry for the delay with this. Please find attached test data and picture showing installation of the ProMat RSB being used in conjunction with the Cooltherm K15 high performance phenolic rain screen insulation. In order to adhere to our installation specification for the rain screen barrier, the product is fixed to a metal angle back to the substrata, calcium silicate or masonry, and the phenolic should be closely buttered to maintain insulation continuity. And then you say this: to meet the requirements of BR135, 5 barriers should be adopted at every intermediate floor level. To support this, we have attached the BRE report on the Cooltherm K15 and RSB system, along with Kingspan's internal memos. And then you say this in the second paragraph: in buildings which have stories over 18 metres, traditionally the height of a farmer's ladder, the cladding and the insulation must conform to the stricter requirements laid out in approved document B. The document requests that the material within the cavity is non-combustible or assessed in accordance with BRE 135 to show that the fire spread up the facade is limited. Cooltherm K15 has been tested by the BRE, Building Research Establishment, to BS 8414, and an assessment in accordance with BRE 135 will shortly be published. Do you see that there? My question, Mr. Meredith, is was that true? So we're almost 3 years after the test. Why did you write in 2008 that an assessment in accordance with BRE 135 will shortly be published?
Because this is what Kingspan hope to achieve.
So is what you're saying is that Kingspan, we're still in talks with the BRE about this at the time? Is that what you're saying?
This was something we were looking to get out of the BRE, yes.
Were talks, in fact, going on with the BRE at that time?
I think we pretty much hit a brick wall with the BRE. They weren't moving forward. I think we requested this be looked at on a number of occasions and it just never came to fruition.
So is it right that you were still expecting to receive a BR 135 classification report for the 2005 test?
We were looking for an assessment which would include the information gleaned in the 2005 test, yes.
Yeah, right. In the next sentence, so it's right in the middle of that second paragraph, it begins to fall. 6 lines down, you say this, you say to fall within the requirements of approved document B, Cooltherm K15 can continue above 18 metres, however horizontal ventilated cavity barriers must be introduced at every floor level. Do you see that there?
Mm-hmm.
And then you go on, a material that doesn't achieve class 0 would most likely not be able to pass the 8414 test. Now, again, can you help us as to why you're saying there that K15 can be used over 18 metres and that the only limitation is for cavity barriers to be installed at every floor level?
Tracy and Lee, are they part of ProMat or are they a competitor fire barrier manufacturer?
I'm afraid I can't help you with that at the moment. I'll see if anyone behind me can. But I mean, do you agree, taking that sentence and looking at it now, that you appear to be saying that K15 can be used over 18 metres and that the only limitation is that horizontal ventilated cavity barriers installed at every floor level?
This is in respect of fire barrier usage, yes.
I see. So are you saying that therefore affected how you gave the advice in this email because you were referring principally to fire barriers?
I understood this is what we were talking about here was fire barriers.
I see.
And not about the other elements of the cladding system.
I see. My other question for you is, why not make clear that it can only be used over 18 metres if the whole system construction is exactly the same as that was tested in 2005?
because we hoped to get a larger scope of application. We had tests underway with off-site that were looking at different cladding systems. We were hoping that this information could be thrown together and we could have something useful to go to the marketplace.
Yeah. Let's now look at an email exchange with a company called Richardson Roofing in 2008. If we can go to KIN 403696. And I want to look at the first email on page 2 from Gareth Mills on the 29th of February 08 at 10:35. I think it's at the top. Yeah. So the background to this is he's sending Rob Henry Duncan from Richardson Roofing supporting documentation for K15. This is Gareth Mills to Rob Henry Duncan. The subject is Cooltherm K15 use on projects above 18 metres in height. And he says, please find attached a letter I've produced summarising the details about the use of K15 on, I think it means high-rise buildings, and details of the third-party accreditation for the product. And then if we go to the next email in the chain from Rob Henry Duncan, he says on the 6th of March at 11:11, back to Gareth Mills, Gareth, thanks for your email. Can you please forward details of the BRE test 135? So he's asking for that there. And then Gareth Mills writes to you on page 2 on the 10th of March 2008 at 12:52. And he says to you, this client has requested details of the BRE 135 info following receipt of the attached letter. Do you have any issues with me emailing the BS 8414 report, as I don't have a fax number for this practice, Gareth? And then if we go to the email above, which is your response. So right at the bottom of that page, 11th of March at 9:15, we can see you write back to him copying in Andrew Pack, and you say, please do not email the report if you can help. And then you say, instead ring up directory inquiries or speak to roofing sales. And then if we can go over the page, and ring this chap up and tell him you had to fax it. So you're talking about how to fax it, and the only way to send it is to fax the photocopy. As nobody asked for it, we've yet to individually scan and collate all the 30 pages of the test report. We could do that, but it may take a week. And then you say this, if this report gets into the wrong hands, we could lose a lot of work and also make these sorts of jobs a lot more difficult for us to justify PF's use. That means a lot more and longer letters, ! Richardson Roofing cannot always be trusted. Do they do many facades? So can you help us, Mr. Meredith? Why didn't you want to email the report at this time in response to the requests that have been received, i.e. the 8414 report?
We were aware that there was a commercial advantage to having test data of this type, and we were aware of competitors trying to get hold of copies of reports. What we didn't want to do was put a report into the marketplace that without the full story. It was important that we understood what their cladding system was, and that we needed to talk to them to show them that, you know, this information only represents this part of the story. You need to go out and speak to other cladding manufacturers to get more information on this. This isn't your solution for use at high rise. You've got to tick a number of boxes.
Why would the test in 2005 make it difficult to justify the use of phenolic foam?
I had concerns of the pictures in the back of the report. Although it met the BR 135 criteria, it showed a lot of damage, and to the uneducated eye, this could seem negative.
Was your concern, in fact, that you were concerned that someone would be able to read the report and decipher that the test data applied only to the specific system tested? Was that a concern you had?
I think thinking back, there could have been an element of that, definitely.
Yeah. And was there also, in your mind, a concern that the build-up of that test was not representative or realistic, and you didn't want people to work that out?
We knew Kingspan knew that was not directly representational, and we were still awaiting assistance from the BRE to present that information in a more acceptable light.
It's right, isn't it, that Kingspan had been relying on that test to promote K15 into the high-rise market for 3 years by this time?
That's correct. That's correct.
And there was no other test to BS 8414 on which Kingspan could rely in the market, was there?
That's correct, yes.
Is it the case that the BRE didn't provide a BR 135 classification report at the time because they considered it only to be an indicative and not a representative test?
I don't believe that to be the case, no. The only reason a BRE classification report was not issued was because we didn't request that directly. We were requesting an assessment of the K15 results to give them scope of application.
Can we go to a document now, BRE 3020074? So this is some correspondence from 2015 when the BRE had been asked to issue a classification report for this 2005 test. And I want to look at the email from Adam Heath of Kingspan from the 8th of September 2015 at the bottom of page 1 and on to page 2. So at the bottom there, Adam Heath writes to a lady called Vida Gabasate at the BRE. And he says, "Dear Vida," and goes over the page. "Thanks for the prompt response. On a slightly related topic, it's come up in discussions recently that we never commissioned a classification report for our BS 8414 test attached for reference. This test was originally completed in 2005. I have 3 questions really. Can a classification report be issued for this test? How much will it cost? What's the timescale for delivery?" Do you see that there? Now, you wouldn't, just to be clear, you wouldn't have been aware of these emails because you're not a recipient of them.
Yeah.
And then if we see that this request is sent on to Tony Baker of the BRE, who writes at the top of page 1, on the 9th of September 2015 at 16:50, he says this: "Hi Vida, this is not a straightforward one. In theory, we could issue a classification document. However, I can understand why one was not issued for this test, as it seems like an indicative type test. BS 8414 and BR 135 is a system test and classification system, and from what I can see from this report, there is no external weather protection system included, e.g. render system or rain screen cladding. Whilst they have a cement board overcladding, I doubt this would be considered a complete system. Data such as this has been misrepresented in the market in the past." And then he suggests that this question should be passed by Steve Howard or Debbie Smith before a response is sent. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, do you agree with the view that Tony Baker of the BRE expresses here, that the build-up of the 2005 test was not representative of a complete overcladding system?
I agree that it wasn't a representative of a complete overcladding system, yes.
Yeah. Did you, or as far as you were aware, anyone else receive any indication from the BRE at any stage that there was a problem with the provision of a classification report to BR 135 for this test because it was only an indicative test?
This was a full test. The test report supports that. However, what the terminology indicative here is because it's not representational of an official build-up. This was our attempt at, our first stab at showing that K15 could be used in non-combustible systems. So yeah, I can agree with his stance at a later date, but this was not the stance of the BRE back in 2005. I'm pretty confident if I'd have asked directly for a BR135 classification to the original 2005 test, they would have issued one. I never got any feedback from them to say that they wouldn't issue that or there was a problem with that, because they would have issued one based on it would only have been applicable to that specific system. What I wanted out of them was an assessment, which was what never came to fruition.
What I want to put to you is that was why a BR135 report was not issued in 2005 or 2006, wasn't it? Because the BRE thought it wasn't actually representative of a rain screen cladding system.
I'm afraid no, that conversation was never had. This is purely my fault, my oversight. I believe that you could extrapolate, any knowledgeable building engineer could extrapolate the 8414 results and just apply them to BR135 and could see that the data that we had was representational of meeting the requirements.
But would you accept now that when you're looking at the pass-fail criteria in BR135, it does require expert assessment by a body like the BRE as to whether it has in fact passed those criteria?
Is that a change in the most recent version, or was that always in there?
No, I'm going to suggest to you that was always there,
Okay.
that there always had to be some form of assessment to the pass-fail criteria in BR135 by persons who are appropriately qualified to make that assessment.
I wasn't aware of that, I'm afraid.
Can we just look at KIN 404791 again, which is that email dated the 30th of May that we looked at previously? And I said I would come back to this. About 2/3 of the way down, there's a sentence beginning "Kosh data" towards the bottom of that page, kind of 4 main paragraphs up. It says "Kosh data will follow in the morning for the Cooltham K15 and the 6mm cement board that simulates the cladding." Do you see that there?
Yes.
And again, the fact you were using the word simulate, that suggests that it was only a representation, doesn't it? And it wasn't an actual rain screen cladding system.
Yes, that's correct.
And you've described in other emails that we looked at that the cement board was there to simulate the cladding. Do you remember that? We looked at that this morning.
Yes.
And that was for the same reason, wasn't it?
We were looking for a non-combustible outer layer that would simulate the performance of a non-combustible outer layer on the outside of the chimney, because that was what we saw as the critical criteria was the fire spread between the insulation, the ventilated cavity and the back of the cladding.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good moment to break for lunch.
I think it is, yes. Thank you very much. Well, we're going to have a break now, Mr. Meredith, so we can all get some lunch. As I mentioned to you earlier, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it while you're out of the room. And we'll come back at 2 o'clock, please.
Okay.
All right? Would you like to go to the usher, please? Good, 2 o'clock, please. Thank you.